They mocked Ibrahim Traoré at the airport terminal until a stranger whispered the truth. The air conditioning in the airport terminal hummed with indifference as Ibrahim Traoré stood at the priority check-in counter, his simple linen shirt dampened with sweat from the tropical heat outside. The bustling international airport was a symphony of contrasts, sleek business travelers gliding through priority lanes while locals waited in endless queues. "I need to speak with your manager," Ibrahim said quietly, his voice steady despite the dismissive glare from the attendant who barely looked up from her computer. "Sir, step aside. This lane is for business class and diplomatic passengers only," she replied, her eyes flicking to his modest attire, worn jeans and dusty shoes that had walked through the rural villages of Burkina Faso just hours before. Behind him, a European businessman in an impeccable suit cleared his throat impatiently. The attendant immediately brightened, waving Ibrahim aside as if he were invisible. "Yes, sir, I can help you right away." Ibrahim didn't move, his dignity like an invisible shield around him. Something in his eyes, a quiet authority, a patient resolve, made the attendant pause momentarily before she called security with an exaggerated sigh. As two guards approached, an elderly man watching from nearby shook his head slightly, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He alone recognized the man everyone else was dismissing. Comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories like this, because what happens next will shock you. 3 years earlier, Ibrahim had walked these same polished floors as Captain Traoré, one of many military officers accompanying a delegation. Back then, nobody had noticed him either. A thin, serious man with watchful eyes, always 2 steps behind more senior officials. Now, as president of Burkina Faso following a military transition of power, he still carried that same unassuming presence, a quality that had allowed him to rise through ranks without attracting the dangerous attention of corrupt superiors. The security guards flanked him, one touching his elbow with unnecessary force. "Sir, I'm asking you to move to the standard queue," the taller guard said, his tone suggesting this was a final warning. Ibrahim nodded calmly. "I understand. But there seems to be a misunderstanding. I have diplomatic status." The check-in attendant rolled her eyes dramatically. "Do you have diplomatic papers, a special passport, proper identification?" Her voice rose with each question, drawing curious glances from nearby travelers. Ibrahim reached slowly into his pocket, but before he could retrieve his identification, the second guard stepped closer. "These tricks don't work here. Every day people try to claim special status," he said, voice dripping with disdain. "Move along before we have you removed." The elderly man who had been watching approached, his steps measured and deliberate. Ibrahim recognized him instantly, a retired ambassador from the previous government who had chosen to remain in service as an advisor despite the change in leadership. "Patience, Mr. President," the ambassador whispered, barely audible as he passed. "Let them show their true colors." Ibrahim's eyes met the ambassador's briefly, an understanding passing between them. The ambassador continued walking, disappearing, into the crowd like a ghost. The European businessman behind Ibrahim huffed impatiently. "Some people simply don't understand their place," he said loudly to the attendant, who smiled in conspiratorial agreement. Ibrahim felt his phone vibrate, his security detail, undoubtedly wondering why he had slipped away from them at the entrance. It had been a spontaneous decision, born from years of watching how differently officials treated ordinary citizens. After months of negotiations with international partners, of sitting across from Western diplomats who spoke about Africa as if its people were children needing guidance, he had wanted to experience the system as his citizens did. "I'll wait in the regular line," Ibrahim finally said, stepping back from the counter. The guards relaxed visibly, satisfied that order had been restored. As he turned away, he caught sight of a young airport employee watching the scene with troubled eyes, the only staff member who seemed uncomfortable with the treatment he was receiving. "Let's show them what dignity looks like," Ibrahim whispered to himself as he joined the winding queue where his fellow Burkinabe citizens waited with the practiced patience of people accustomed to being overlooked. Ibrahim stood in the standard queue, observing how the airport staff treated his fellow travelers. Families with children were rushed through with minimal assistance. Elderly women carrying heavy bags were left standing while staff chatted among themselves, and anyone who asked questions was met with thinly veiled irritation. Yet when Western tourists approached with questions, the same staff members transformed, smiling, helpful, accommodating. 30 minutes passed before he reached the front of the line. The check-in agent barely looked at him, hand extended, expectantly for his passport. "Destination?" she asked flatly, fingers poised above her keyboard. "Paris! Connecting flight to the UN General Assembly in New York," Ibrahim replied, sliding his passport across the counter. The agent snorted, finally looking up. "UN General Assembly? Are you a diplomat now?" Her tone dripped with sarcasm as she flipped open his passport. Her eyes widened momentarily at the diplomatic marking, but rather than apologize, she narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "This could be fake. We've had issues with fraudulent documents lately." She flagged over a supervisor who approached with the weary expression of someone preparing to deal with a troublemaker. From across the terminal, Ibrahim noticed members of his security detail filtering in, maintaining distance as he had instructed, but positioning themselves strategically. Their eyes constantly scanned the area, communicating silently through earpieces. He had asked for 30 minutes alone, 30 minutes to experience what ordinary citizens endured. "Is there a problem?" the supervisor asked, not addressing Ibrahim but speaking directly to the agent as if he were invisible. "Possible fraudulent diplomatic passport, claims he's attending the UN Assembly." The agent's voice carried deliberately, causing nearby travelers to stare. Ibrahim felt their eyes on him, some sympathetic, others suspicious, most simply grateful that they weren't the ones being delayed. The young airport employee Ibrahim had noticed earlier approaches, carrying a tablet. "Sir," he said to the supervisor, "the Burkina Faso delegation is on the priority list for today's Paris flight. Perhaps I could help verify." The supervisor waved him away. "This is a security matter now. Return to your station." Ibrahim watched the young man retreat, noting how he lingered nearby, eyes still concerned. It was a small act of kindness, attempting to intervene when witnessing an injustice, but it stood out starkly against the backdrop of indifference. "Your passport will need additional verification," the supervisor informed Ibrahim. "Please, step aside while we process the remaining passengers." Ibrahim nodded calmly. "May I ask how long this verification will take?" "My flight departs in 90 minutes. It takes as long as it takes," the supervisor replied curtly. "Security protocols don't operate on passenger convenience." As Ibrahim stepped aside, he noticed the ambassador had returned, now seated in the airport cafe with a perfect view of the unfolding situation. Their eyes met briefly, and the ambassador gave an almost imperceptible nod. The European businessman from earlier breezed past, now checked in and heading toward the premium lounge. He slowed as he passed Ibrahim, a smirk playing at his lips. "Some advice," he said, voice lowered but not enough to prevent others from hearing. "Next time, know your place. These games of pretending to be someone important, they don't work in the real world." Ibrahim looked at him steadily. "And what place would that be, sir?" The businessman gestured vaguely. "You know exactly what I mean. There's a natural order to things. Some lead, others follow." "And who decides this order?" Ibrahim asked, genuinely curious about the man's perspective. "History, capability, Civilization, the businessman replied with casual confidence. Some cultures have simply progressed further than others. It's not personal, it's reality. A small crowd had gathered now, drawn by the unusual sight of a confrontation in the premium section of the terminal. Among them were several African business people who had been processed without issue, their Western attire and premium credit cards serving as passports to respectful treatment. The head of airport security approached, having been summoned by the supervisor. A tall man with a perpetual frown, he carried himself with the exaggerated authority of someone who relished small powers. "You're causing a disturbance," he said to Ibrahim, ignoring the businessman who had initiated the conversation. "If you continue, we'll be forced to escort you from the terminal." Ibrahim maintained his composure. "I'm simply waiting for verification of my passport, as instructed by your staff." While questioning the natural order of society, the security had added, having overheard the exchange, "Perhaps in your country such talk is permitted, but here we expect visitors to show appropriate respect." The young airport employee who had tried to help earlier approached again, this time more determined. "Sir," he addressed the security head, "I've confirmed that there is indeed a diplomatic delegation from Burkina Faso traveling today." "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." The security head turned on him. "Did anyone ask for your input? Return to your position immediately or you'll be reported." But the young man stood his ground, something in Ibrahim's quiet dignity giving him courage. "Sir, with respect, I believe we may be making a serious diplomatic error." The businessman laughed. "A diplomatic error? With him?" He gestured dismissively at Ibrahim. "Look at him. Does he look like someone who matters on the world stage?" The security head seemed to hesitate, looking more closely at Ibrahim's passport. Something was finally registering. The special coding, the diplomatic insignia that couldn't easily be forged. The terminal doors slid open, and the airport director walked in, surrounded by a small entourage of administrative staff. They moved, with purpose, heading directly toward the check-in area, and that's when the airport director walked in. The airport director strode toward the gathering crowd, his tailored suit and authoritative presence causing staff members to straighten. Instinctively, his expression shifted from administrative concern to confusion as he assessed the situation. A simply dressed African man surrounded by security personnel, a European businessman hovering nearby, and an unusual tension permeating the air. "What seems to be the problem here?" the director asked, addressing his security chief. Before the security head could answer, the elderly ambassador stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of decades in diplomatic service. "The problem, Director, is that your staff has been detaining and humiliating His Excellency President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso for the past 45 minutes. A stunned silence fell over the terminal. The security chief's face drained of color as he looked down at the passport in his hands, then back at Ibrahim's calm face. The European businessman took an involuntary step backward. The check-in attendant who had first dismissed Ibrahim gripped the counter for support. The young employee who had tried to help looked vindicated but terrified. Ibrahim finally reached into his inner pocket and removed a small identification card bearing the official presidential seal, the ID he had been about to show before being interrupted by security. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," Ibrahim said quietly, his voice somehow more powerful for its restraint. "I came today without my usual security detail because I wanted to experience how my citizens are treated when they travel. Now I understand why so many return home with stories of humiliation." The director's professional composure crumbled momentarily. "Mr. President, I cannot begin to express. This is completely unacceptable. Please accept my deepest apologies for this treatment." Ibrahim nodded acknowledgement but continued, "Apologies are valuable when they lead to change. I wonder, How many of my citizens receive apologies when they are treated this way? Or is contrition reserved only for those with titles? From the entrance, a group of suited men and women appeared, Ibrahim's security detail, no longer willing to maintain distance after witnessing the confrontation. They moved with practiced efficiency, forming a loose perimeter around their president. The security chief extended the passport with a trembling hand. "Mr. President, there will be consequences for this misunderstanding. I assure you the staff involved will be disciplined immediately." Ibrahim didn't take the passport immediately. The staff acted according to the culture you have created, a culture where worth is determined by appearance, accent, or perceived status. He looked around at the gathered staff members, many now staring at the floor. This is not about punishment. It is about recognition and change. He turned to the European businessman who was attempting to slip away unnoticed. "You spoke of a natural order, of some cultures being more advanced than others. Perhaps true advancement is measured not by technological achievement, but by how we recognize the inherent dignity in every person." The businessman flushed crimson. "I had no idea who you were. Had I known, that is precisely the problem." Ibrahim interrupted gently. "Your respect was conditional on my title, not my humanity." The airport director, desperate to regain control of the situation, gestured toward the VIP lounge. "Mr. President, please allow us to escort you to our diplomatic suite while we prepare your departure. I will personally ensure I came as a citizen to experience what my people face every day," Ibrahim said, his voice carrying to the furthest corners of the now silent terminal. "Now I will leave as a president who knows exactly what must change." He turned to the young employee who had tried to intervene. "What is your name?" "Malik, sir." "Malik Ouedraogo." Malik showed integrity by attempting to correct an injustice. When he saw it, even at risk to his position, that is the foundation of true service. Ibrahim extended his hand, and after a moment of shock, Malik shook it firmly. The director nodded vigorously. "Of course, Malik will be recognized for his exceptional judgment." Ibrahim addressed the gathered crowd, which now included travelers, with phones recording the unexpected diplomatic incident. "When we judge people by their appearance or their accent or their clothing, we tell a story about ourselves, not about them. Today, many stories have been told in this terminal. Some of prejudice and arrogance, others of courage and integrity." He retrieved his passport from the still stunned security chief. "I will be discussing with diplomatic channels the treatment of African travelers in international terminals, not as a complaint, but as a necessary evolution. Dignity is not a luxury to be afforded to some. It is a right that belongs to all." The ambassador smiled proudly as Ibrahim's security detail closed ranks, finally resuming their normal protective formation around him. The airport staff parted like a sea, many bowing their heads in embarrassment or respect as the president they had mocked and dismissed walked toward the diplomatic lounge, his bearing unchanged by the revelation of his identity. The same quiet dignity he had shown from the beginning. Within hours, video of the confrontation spread across social media platforms. Travelers who had witnessed the event shared their perspectives, and Burkinabe citizens expressed both outrage at the treatment of their president and pride in his composed response. International news outlets picked up the story, framing it as everything from a diplomatic incident to a powerful commentary on global inequality. Inside the diplomatic lounge, Ibrahim sat across from the airport director, who had been making increasingly desperate attempts at damage control. Beside them, the ambassador watched with the measured patience of a man who had witnessed decades of such reckonings. "We'll implement immediate sensitivity training for all frontline staff," the director promised, mopping perspiration from his brow, "and a complete review of our protocols for diplomatic travelers." That addresses only half the issue, Ibrahim replied, stirring his tea thoughtfully. What about travelers who don't carry diplomatic passports? The grandmother returning from visiting her grandchildren? The student traveling to university? The businessman seeking opportunities? Are they less deserving of basic courtesy? The director shifted uncomfortably. Of course not, Mr. President. All travelers deserve respect. Yet they don't all receive it, Ibrahim observed. The system works precisely as designed, efficiently for some, humiliatingly for others. A light knock at the door interrupted them. Malik, the young employee who had attempted to help earlier, entered with a folder of documents. "The flight details you requested, Director," he said, placing the folder on the table. He acknowledged Ibrahim with a respectful nod, still somewhat awed to be in the President's presence. Ibrahim gestured to an empty chair. "Please, join us for a moment." Malik hesitated, looking to the director for permission. "It wasn't courage that made you speak up earlier," Ibrahim said, as Malik carefully took a seat. "It was something more fundamental, recognition of common humanity. What made you notice what others ignored?" Malik's hands twisted nervously in his lap. "My father was a diplomat for Burkina Faso many years ago before the political changes. I grew up watching how differently he was treated when in uniform versus when traveling as a civilian. I promised myself if I ever worked in such an environment I would see the person, not just their appearance." The ambassador leaned forward with interest. "Who was your father?" "Ousmane Ouedraogo, sir." Recognition flashed across the ambassador's face. "Ousmane was a colleague of mine, a brilliant man dedicated to our country's development." The director seized the opportunity to insert himself into the more personal conversation. "We would be honored to have Mr. Malik join our diplomatic services team, given his background and demonstrated judgment." Ibrahim studied the young man thoughtfully. "Would that interest you, Malik? A position more aligned with your values?" "I would be honored, Mr. President, but problems don't change when good people are simply relocated. Perhaps I could help implement the new training programs the director mentioned to ensure they address the real issues, not just superficial compliance?" Ibrahim smiled, the first genuine smile since the ordeal began. "Precisely. Change happens from within systems, not apart from them." The door opened again, and a security officer entered, whispering to the director, whose face paled further. "Mr. President, I've just been informed that the head of security and the check-in attendant have been suspended pending investigation," the director said, attempting to demonstrate decisive action. Ibrahim frowned. "That was not my request. Please, reinstate them immediately." "But sir, their behavior was unacceptable. Scapegoating individuals doesn't address systemic issues," Ibrahim replied firmly. "Instead, have them lead the development of new protocols alongside Malik. Transform this moment from humiliation to education." As the director left to reverse the suspensions, the ambassador chuckled quietly. "You've changed, Ibrahim. The captain I knew years ago would have demanded heads roll." "Leadership isn't about punishment," Ibrahim replied, watching Malik absorb their exchange. "It's about transformation. The same principles apply whether leading a country or an airport terminal." Through the lounge windows, Ibrahim could see the European businessman from earlier detained at a security checkpoint, his privileged passage now interrupted by questions and verification procedures. Poetic justice, perhaps. But Ibrahim took no pleasure in it. "Have him released as well," Ibrahim instructed a nearby aide. "Let every part of this day become a lesson in dignity, not retribution." The ambassador smiled. "You know this incident will be discussed at the UN Assembly?" "Good," Ibrahim replied. "Let it be the beginning of a larger conversation about how nations and their citizens interact in these international spaces. Every confrontation carries the seed of connection if we're brave enough to nurture it." As his security detail prepared for departure, Ibrahim placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. Remember this day, not for the recognition of a president, but for the recognition of our shared humanity. That's the revolution we're really fighting for. 1 month later, Ibrahim's convoy arrived at the same airport terminal, this time with full presidential protocol. As his motorcade pulled up to the VIP entrance, he noticed the subtle changes immediately. The newly installed sign reading "Welcome" in multiple African languages alongside European ones, the more diverse security personnel, and a familiar face waiting to greet him. Malik stood at attention in a new uniform, designating him as Diplomatic Relations Coordinator, his posture reflecting pride without arrogance. Beside him was the former head of security, now serving as Integration Training Director, his expression a complex mixture of humility and determination. "Mr. President," Malik greeted him, "welcome back to our terminal. We are honored by your return." Ibrahim shook his hand warmly. "The honor is mutual, Coordinator Ouedraogo. I see changes have been implemented." "Yes, sir. Not just physical changes, but procedural ones. Every traveler now receives a consistent verification process, regardless of appearance or nationality." As they walked through the terminal, Ibrahim observed staff interacting with travelers. The same professional courtesy extended to everyone, from business executives to families with young children. The atmosphere felt different: efficiency without coldness, security without suspicion. The former head of security stepped forward. "Mr. President, if I may, what happened during your last visit has transformed our approach. We've implemented a dignity-first protocol across all departments." Ibrahim nodded appreciatively. "And the check-in attendant?" "She now trains all new staff using her experience as a teaching moment. Her perspective has been invaluable. She understood the system's flaws because she had perpetuated them." They passed the cafe where the ambassador had sat during Ibrahim's previous visit. The elderly diplomat was there again, this time officially accompanying the presidential delegation. "History rhymes, doesn't it?" the ambassador commented as Ibrahim paused at his table. "Indeed it does," Ibrahim replied, "though the verse improves with each telling." Near the premium lounge, Ibrahim recognized the European businessman from the previous incident, preparing to board a flight. Upon seeing the presidential entourage, the man's face flushed with recognition and embarrassment. To everyone's surprise, Ibrahim approached him. "We meet again," Ibrahim said, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, the businessman shook it, his demeanor markedly different. "Mr. President, I owe you an apology for my behavior during your last visit." "What? Changed your perspective?" Ibrahim asked, genuinely curious. The businessman glanced at the floor. "After our encounter, I was detained for 3 hours, questioned, verified, made to wait without explanation. It was enlightening to experience what I had dismissed as others' exaggeration." He paused. "And then I began noticing how many of my African business partners had been enduring such treatment silently for years." Ibrahim nodded. "Understanding often begins when our assumptions are challenged." Safe travels. As the presidential delegation continued toward the diplomatic lounge for a scheduled meeting with international transportation officials, a young girl approached, breaking away from her mother despite the security personnel's concern. "Are you really the president who pretended not to be a president?" she asked, with childlike directness. Ibrahim smiled, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "I didn't pretend to be anything other than myself. Sometimes the world sees only what it expects to see." "My mommy says you taught everyone a lesson about judging people," the girl continued, her mother now approaching with an apologetic expression. "Perhaps," Ibrahim replied, "but the greater lesson is that dignity isn't something given to us by others. It's something we carry within ourselves, regardless of how we're treated." As the child rejoined her mother, Ibrahim stood, noticing how many travelers had paused to witness the exchange. Among them was the formerly dismissive check-in attendant, now watching with a complex mixture of regret and respect. The ambassador joined Ibrahim as they continued walking. "You've started something significant, you know. Other African leaders are discussing similar citizen experiences to better understand the daily challenges their people face. Leadership without perspective becomes privilege," Ibrahim replied, "and privilege without accountability becomes oppression." They reached the diplomatic lounge where international aviation officials waited to discuss new protocols for standardizing treatment of all travelers, regardless of origin. As the doors opened, Ibrahim caught sight of his reflection in the polished surface, the same man in a different context, viewed through transformed eyes. The elderly ambassador, who had revealed his identity that fateful day, stepped close. "You've shown that true power isn't in titles or uniforms," he said quietly. "It was never about being recognized as president." Ibrahim nodded, clasping the older man's shoulder with respect. "True power isn't in the titles we hold, but in the dignity we maintain when those titles are stripped away." As the diplomatic meeting began, outside in the main terminal, travelers from across Africa moved through the security checkpoints with the same efficiency and respect now afforded to everyone. Small changes, perhaps, in the grand scheme of global inequality, but beginnings matter. Every journey of transformation starts with a single moment of recognition, a truth whispered when it would be easier to remain silent. Have you ever been judged for how you look? Comment below. Your story could change someone's perspective. Don't forget to like and subscribe.